Hey there, today I want to go over 5 rule interactions you might be playing wrong or just may not even know about in no particular order, along with a couple honorable mentions for good measure. My name is Nate, and welcome to the Gamers Guild. There are plenty of rules that you may not know about or are just playing wrong. And I'm not talking about bad strategies like leaving your opponent's hull get 15 damage and letting him just wreck your team for the rest of the game. Rather, this is going to be a list that goes over some of the questions I have seen repeatedly asked on different social media pages, or things that I've seen an opponent try to do, or even made the mistake myself. So for the honorable mentions, I have cover and line of sight. Because this game does not use true line of sight like several other miniatures games, it is something that can be pretty confusing at first, but I already have a video going in depth with how those mechanics work, and I'll have a link down in the description and a tag for it at the end of this video. The other honorable mention I have is never climbing down terrain. While you may and probably should know about climbing up terrain, your models never have to worry about climbing down terrain. They can just make an advance off, which I will talk a little bit more later on in this list. Getting into the actual list here at number 5, I have affiliations. And there are a few things that you can get wrong with them. The first is what characters are in what affiliation. The most common offender so far has been Spider-Man, because he is not an Avenger in the game of Marvel Crisis Protocol. At the moment, he is unaffiliated along with Doc Ock and Venom. You can find out what characters are a part of which affiliations, though, by looking at these affiliation cards. These usually will come with the leader of the affiliation. The second thing that is easy to get wrong is that your squad needs to be 51% of an affiliation to be able to have the affiliation. That means that in a squad of 4 characters, 3 of the 4 will need to have the same affiliation, not just the 2, unfortunately. You can find this on page 13 of the digital rulebook. The other part of affiliations I see people get wrong often is trying to use a team tactic card that requires an affiliation for a character to use it. Like Zemo can't participate in Avengers Assemble or Wakanda Forever, even if your squad has the corresponding leadership ability. The reason for this is because once you hit that 51% affiliation line, everyone in your squad can now use the leadership ability of that team. So Hulk can get plenty of power back from Thunderclap if he ends up with Red Skull and a Cabal squad, or Venom can reduce the cost of so many snacks if Captain America and the Avengers are backing him up. We know this because it says so on page 7 of the digital rulebook. However, nowhere here or anywhere else does it say that Hulk becomes a Cabal member, nor Venom an Avenger. So Hulk won't get to reroll dice or spend power for Dark Reign, and Venom can't participate in Avengers Assemble or Anger Management. At number 4, we have one of the ones that I have misplayed a few times, and that is thinking that different types of movement are interchangeable. Most notable are an advance versus a climb. On page 16 of the rulebook, it spells out the different types of movement and how characters participate in those moves. And while a climb and an advance are very similar in that they are both types of movement that require the use of an action, and they both move characters the same way with the movement tools, however they are different. Which means that when Baron Zemo uses Steel Rush, he is not able to move over or onto anything size 3 or more by switching over to the short movement tool. And the same thing goes for things like Avengers Assemble, unless that character already has flying or wall crawler, because then they count as size 5 for their move anyway. But remember that you can make an advance off of a terrain piece that is larger than your character, and you don't have to worry about climbing down. Number 3 is mistiming the steps from the attack timing chart. The chart, while pretty deep, is straightforward, which explains why you only get to the exploding dice from crits on that initial roll, to when you need to push or throw a character, and so on. The most troublesome area I've seen struggles with either just remembering or being done wrong is when there are triggers from wild effects and when they need to resolve. Things like pushes and throws typically happen before damage is dealt, that way even if a character gets dazed, the push will have happened beforehand. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to be pushed. In the same vein, most counterattack type of abilities happen only after the attack is resolved, so by pushing them away first, there is a chance to get out of the defender's ability range. As well, you always have to keep in mind there are going to be exceptions to the rule, so make sure you read the attack or trigger abilities thoroughly to know when to activate them. Another weird interaction is with MODOK's Force Field. It cancels wild abilities from triggering most of the time. The only one that still kind of works against MODOK is Pierce, but the wild dice will still get cancelled out. but because the attacker has priority when the changing your opponent's dice step comes around, Pierce will still be able to trigger before MODOK can make that wild disappear. For number 2, I have throws. Because throws can be used on both terrain and characters, and the rules for throwing each is different, it is easy to see why there are several questions on how they work. Thankfully, Atomic Mass Games has worked out a very streamlined way of doing throws. Unfortunately, they are split into 2 different sections in the book, which can make it difficult to follow. The rules for throwing a character on page 17 of the digital rulebook, while the rules for throwing terrain can be found on page 24. When you throw a character from either a superpower or the trigger of an attack, you place the corresponding movement tool made completely straight next to the thrown character and move that character along the path of the movement tool until they come in contact with the terrain feature or another character. Which also means you can't just place the movement tool down and move the character on the other side. You have to have the character centered on the movement tool and then follow the tool, and if the base makes contact with a piece of terrain or another character, they stop. The thrown character takes the damage from the collision, and then you follow the rest of the rules for either removing terrain if needed, or making a dodge roll if one of the characters was thrown into another. However, if the thrown character doesn't end up colliding with anything, then no damage is applied at all. As for throwing terrain, you will measure from the character doing the throwing and use the correct movement tool as before that has been completely straightened. So you don't measure from the terrain, it just gets removed from the board, and you don't attempt to place it at the other end of the movement tool. What you do need is for the movement tool to overlap another character for them to then make a dodge check. It may also be worth noting that when throwing, pushing, etc., that you have to line up the movement tool on the throwing or thrown character within the teeth of the movement tool. You can't have it line up with a corner of the tool touching a tip of the base to skirt around things on the board or just get a weird angle. And finally, not the worst or the best or anything really, but definitely something that may change some strategies down the road. At number 1, we have the playing of team tactic cards. There is a misconception of when some of these cards can be played. First, there is the active versus reactive. Reactive cards have a very specific window in which they must be played, which keeps them from being too problematic. Active cards, on the other hand, are a bit more open, and in some ways more than you might think, and in others maybe not quite as open. On pages 8 and 9, where it talks about team tactic cards, it mentions that active cards can be played at any time during your turn. But any time is not really any time. On page 15, it goes a little bit further with the definition of any time. Whenever the rules say an effect, ability, tactic card, or superpower may be used at any time, it doesn't mean literally any time the player wishes. These abilities may be used before or after an action is taken or effect is triggered, but can't interrupt an action or other effect. However, what this does mean is you can get away with playing these tactic cards before you declare which model is going to activate, which means you have Hulk with an activation token on him. You can then play Cosmic Invigoration and let Hulk go again without giving your opponent much of a heads up about the Jade Giant getting a second activation. Which leads me to my last fun thing. Just because a team tactic card lists a specific character, like Gamma Throw mentions Hulk or his target character, neither of the 2 characters listed have to be the active character to play the card. Do you want to make sure Captain America is there to bodyguard a beat-up ally after they got some damage from a counterattack? You can do that. Anyways, that finished off my list of things that you might be playing wrong or may have not even known about. If you ever have any questions about rules, I'm happy to help as best I can, so feel free to leave questions down below, but you can always find more official rulings on the Discord page or on Facebook by tagging Atomic Mass Games. As always, thanks for watching, and keep on gaming.